Chapter 7 takes a little bit of a deeper dive into the restaurants that we discussed in Chapter 6, and we start to talk a little bit more about the operations. So again, it can take on many different forms based on the type of establishment that we're talking about, independent, franchise. And what I mean by that is that, it could be a single person doing this, it could be an department, it could be a corporate organization dedicated to it. But you can see all the things that go into it. You've got, and scheduling becomes key. I can tell you as someone who had a service staff of 100 that scheduling was the bane of my existence, but critically important to our success from a cost control standpoint. Again, maintaining a facility, beverage service, sanitation, and safety. So we'll kind of look at this chart. Again, nothing fits perfectly into one diagram as far as what this would look like. But you can kind of see, I'm trying to get that into focus a little bit better, that this is one example of, obviously you have the GM at the top, and then, front of house, back of house, opening and closing managers. A lot of times with a restaurant, you may be in charge of a department, specifically such as the bar, but you're also going to be an opening and closing manager who works under the GM. What we typically call front of the house is anyone who has contact with the guest. Okay, that could be anybody and everybody. If you have an open kitchen concept, I would argue that that is part of the front of the house in that way as well. You kind of know what the greeter does, and you can call them a host, whatever you want to call them, kind of the same concepts. And then we talk about servers, and as you know, these things take on different meanings at different establishments, and how the menu is presented, QR code, memorization, paper-based, all kinds of different things. Just depends on the concept and how you want to get that across. And then, of course, suggestive selling is, we can call it upselling, trying to steer the customer in a certain direction. So server assistants, bussers can be more than that. But there's some basic functions that they do. Bussers may be someone who would like to be a server at some point, maybe not old enough to be a server, because in most cases 18 years old because of alcohol to be a server. So again, they're the helpers. They are doing pretty much everything and making sure it goes smoothly to assist the server. So again, when we talk about forecasting guest count or covers, right? So if that time period, and you decide when that time period is, could be a shift, lunch, dinner, could be a day, could be a week, could be a month. How many people do we serve in the average guest check? Much like we talked about anything else with sales, right? So every person that comes in spends how much money? Right? And why is that important? It's important for the reasons that you think, right? How are we going to do in sales? How many people do we need to save money on our bottom line, but provide the type of quality service that our guests expect, right? So profit and loss. When I told you that I had a large service staff that I was in charge of managing, it's right people, right place, right time, but not too many people, right? And not too few, because if you have too few, there's going to be a lapse in service. So how do we find that delicate balance? Sometimes it's hard. So it's a game that you play all the time. Look, when it's busy and you're on a wait 7 days a week, then labor is probably not going to be an issue for you. In most cases, that's not how it really goes. You have to figure out the best way to, make a profit. Types of service, American, probably what we're most used to. And I say, as Americans, we're most used to. I shouldn't say we, it could be totally different for you. Less formal. If you've ever been to a French restaurant, then you know about French service. The style is, usually much more formal. Presentation is different, as you can see. All done table side, and it's expensive. And as you can imagine why, when you look at how it's prepared and how you have to do it, it takes a little bit more personnel. If you've never experienced Russian service, you see the difference there. And listen, a lot of places don't necessarily offer that many different types of service, but it's interesting if you can get the experience to witness some of these different styles, because they're really very, very cool. But the more flair you add, the more it's going to cost from a labor standpoint, and the more it's going to cost from a menu standpoint for the guests. Talked about front of the house, then back of the house. And as someone who has managed both, the controls, purchasing, receiving, storing, and issuing, you've probably heard those concepts before. Control. And again, budgeting. Because from a food cost standpoint, yes, there's profit to be made in food, and I don't want you to ever think that there's not. But the exact science of how many ounces and, what a plate looks like and how much of this goes where is critical, and how we do, last in, first out, first in, first out, whatever it is you choose to do, we have to make sure that it's done properly so that we are eliminating as much waste as possible. So how do we do it? We look at the volume of business. If you have previous year's sales, great. If you don't, then at first you have to guess. And then after one day, you have 1 day's worth of sales to look at. So that's good. You come in early, you prep, and you get done. You prep as much as you can. If you're cooking to order, you still can chop vegetables. You can still, pre-make a lot of the items. And then as the orders come in, serve them, right? Control. So from a kitchen standpoint, just like from front of the house, it is, how many people do you have working? How many can handle the rush, right? And as a person, again, who also did scheduling for a kitchen, tricky thing to do too, because as soon as the rush is over, I still have to make plates, but I probably don't need as many people as I did during the rush. So it's this constant game that you're playing where it's like just enough people that it's not too much. I know that sounds cheesy, but that's the game. It's exactly what you do. Comprehensive training, I will tell you over and over again. I am a firm believer in menu pictures for front and back of the house staff so that they all know what it's supposed to look like. So that when they're taking it out of the kitchen, they can say, this doesn't look right. I remember the picture, something's missing. Or they know what a dish looks like even before they see the name. They recognize it from the picture. It's a great study tool for the staff, and I'm all about training the staff, retraining the staff, and quizzing the staff a lot so that they're up to date, especially if you're going to be independent and change your menu a lot. So food production, like we said, recipes on hand, production control sheets, standardization is going to be on the next slide. So what I will tell you is, from a success standpoint and what you're trying to do, standardize recipes for everything. I'm going to circle back and include the front of the house for your drinks. Okay? And you may say something as cheesy as, if someone orders an iced tea, how many slices of lemon do they get? How big should the lemon be? That's how thorough we used to be. I want to eliminate waste. And I used to tell people this all the time. If you're making a recipe that's supposed to make 50 portions and you make 51, you think you did great, you did something wrong. You think you did 49, you did something wrong. If it's supposed to make 50, it has to make 50. More importantly, from a guest standpoint, the first dish out in the morning and the last dish out at the night should look and taste exactly the same. There should be no variance. So that's where the recipes are critical. And again, it is to continue the standard that you've set. You've created this drink or this dish that's perfect. And the way to make it perfect is to have a recipe that is standardized. So in a lot of food classes that I used to teach in a lot of kitchens, we used to have standardized testing all the time and making sure you know how to convert recipes. Because people that tell you they can cook, they have this great dish that they make, and they do, is great. Can they mass produce it? That's the key to success. Oh, I make a great blueberry pie. Cool. Can you make 400 of them? And are they going to be exactly the same as that one you made that was so good? That's the key to success. Purchasing, we talk about that. Again, the standards. What kind of, and this is for everything, guys. What kind of lettuce, what kind of tomatoes, what kind of cheese, what kind of milk, what kind of meat. Okay, what kind of chips, what kind of rice, flour, everything, right? And how you do that, and par stock, and when you reorder. So we hit this certain level that we need to get through everybody. The period is going to be a week, 5 days, okay? Then we need to reorder and how much we need to reorder. Keeping tight, strict controls on who has access, who can handle, who can receive. We want a consistent employee system there where everybody doesn't have access. We have access, we have pilferage. What does pilferage mean? If you don't know, it means employee theft. So cost control of the food beyond over-portioning, under-portioning, doing the recipes wrong is controlling every single aspect of the food. And you see this little diagram which perfectly illustrates all the stuff that goes into it. It's definitely it's an ordeal. And the product specs, again, like I said, sitting down and deciding that this is the only kind of, eggs that we want to use, the only kind of tomatoes, and you go, does it really make a difference? It really does in your recipe if your recipe calls for it. So you have to sit down and say, why do we use Roma? Why do we use a certain type of shrimp? Okay, so again, par stock, we talked about purchase order, how much you're going to do. And the good thing is that once you have established a relationship with some of your vendors, they begin to create a sheet that is specific for your establishment. So these specs are in their system, and they know the kind of flour you want to use, the kind of eggs you want to use, the kind of cheese you want to use, the kind of tomatoes you want to use, and it makes the process so much easier. It's a lot of upfront work, but once that's done, the process becomes much easier. We talked about receiving, checking for qualities. Have someone scheduled whose sole purpose is to check in a delivery. We would get deliveries that would be hundreds of pieces. And if you sign for it, it's essentially a contract and it's over. So are you checking to make sure is everything what it's supposed to be? Delivered in the state that it's supposed to? Is it frozen? Is it fresh? Is it refrigerated? All these different things. The goal of the driver and the product is not to, try to get one over on you, but checking to make sure exactly what you ordered is what was ordered, and then put away immediately how it's supposed to be put away, right? And then when we issue things, which was a big thing for most of the organizations I worked for, was quite simply making sure you minimized access. I talked about FIFO, which is first in, first out. Food cost percentage, as we talked about, again, how we make money and how, when you sell something on the menu, it's just not a random price. We don't charge a random price for a scotch and soda or a draft beer, right? How do we get the cost to where we know we maximize profit, but also where it is considered to be a reasonable price for the guest to pay? And then labor. You constantly battle with having enough people on hand to work and not too many that your labor takes a huge hit, because again, it's a large percentage of your dollar sales of your restaurant. So you're constantly battling with how many people should be working right now. And what happens if I let some people go when we get busy again? It's a game, and it's very hard to predict. As I said, if you're busy all the time and you're pushing people out the door, it's different. That's usually not the case. Again, we see some trends here, and this all goes into proper operations of a restaurant. Food safety and sanitation will continue to be at the forefront of restaurant operations. You don't want somebody getting sick in your establishment. Okay? Because if they do, and it's proven it was you, you're done.